Why is fertility even considered a women's health issue, for instance, when half the time it comes down to the man? And I think it gives men this opportunity to kind of, just say, this is my wife's problem and not stand up and get the testing that they need.
Isn't it nice to have honesty in this conversation? And they're like, but don't you think if you tell women the truth about pregnancy, no one is going to want to get pregnant? Do we like humans? Would we like humans to continue to exist and reproduce? If so, we should probably make sure everyone understands ovulation.
This is Second Opinion. I'm Christina Farr.
I'm Zenooz. And I'm Luba Greenwood.
Welcome to the pod, where each week we navigate what's really going on in healthcare through strikingly candid conversations with the entrepreneurs and investors leading the charge. As your co-hosts, we promise to bring the perspective of a former journalist and investor, a doctor, a lawyer, immersed in the future of medicine with life sciences and digital health.
And we're here to sift the signal from the noise in all of these conversations. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Make sure you stick around at the end of the interview for our debrief.
Hello, and welcome to the Second Opinion podcast, and welcome to our phenomenal guest, Leslie Schrock.
Leslie, it is so good to have you here on the pod. We will be talking about women's health today, which is a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts. We've got 4 women on the pod. So let's dive right in. I'm going to kick off the first question. Leslie, tell us a little bit about what got you so passionate about women's health. And I know that you were also the author of 2 books. So feel free to touch on those and just give us a little bit of a sense of your journey.
I think like so many people in this space, I come to this from a personal place. When I was in my late 20s, I was one of these people, I've never even had a cavity. Like that is the extent of my interaction with the healthcare system. And when I was in my late 20s, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which was my first real interaction with the healthcare system. And it really was a wake-up call. How is it this bad? How is the patient experience this bad? So I went on to be part of the founding team at Rock Health, helped launch a lot of companies in this space. And during that journey, met Kate Ryder at Maven and Corrine at Origin and a lot of other great companies that I came to advise, started investing. And then when it came time for me to get pregnant, again, a personal reason to really care about this, I had a really difficult time. I, in the end, had 3 failed pregnancies. I now have 2 healthy sons. One just turned 5 yesterday, and one is 2. And I felt like if it was this hard for me, I was in my mid-30s, I was quote unquote healthy. Ostensibly, nothing was going on other than I was 34, 35 when I decided to get pregnant. I had a really difficult journey, and no one was really having the conversation that I wanted to have, which is that sometimes pregnancy is great and sometimes it's very hard. And even if it is really great, there are going to be difficult moments for you when you become a parent. And so I met my publisher at Simon & Schuster and wrote my first book, Bumpin, and then started answering the same questions about conception and realized that none of us really know that much about our own bodies. I know you and I have talked about it, Chrissy, at great length for many years. The process of getting pregnant, how does it all work? What part do men play? Which I think we should talk about at some point. I feel like sperm is in the ether this week. There have been a lot of pieces and people talking about sperm. I think actually sperm quality is a women's health problem because it becomes our problem because we're the ones who have to undergo these expensive invasive fertility treatments. So really, I come to women's health from a highly personal place, but I also think that the founders working in this space are truly tremendous, really come at it from a place of passion. And that gives them the thing that I filter for when I invest, which is resilience and grit. It's not enough to have a great idea. You have to have the ability to persist when things get rough, which inevitably they will at some point.
Yeah, so that's like a whole nother episode, I feel like, Leslie. We should talk about what it takes to be a founder and how to build a company.
A lot of what you were sharing kind of reminded me of the first book you wrote, Bumpin. This was like the only time for me when I was pregnant that anybody told me the truth about what I was going to experience. Like I went into it thinking, okay, I'm going to take some cute photos for my Instagram feed and look very glamorous. And then what ended up happening was a host of symptoms ranging from like horrendous nosebleeds through to migraines, through to constipation, I'm going to go there, that nobody told me about. And I just felt lied to. And I'm not going through menopause yet, but I suspect I'm going to feel that same way, because this is another thing that we don't tell women about. So would love your thoughts on that. Like, why do we just hide all this stuff from women, and then they find themselves just having to turn to a book like yours to get any semblance of the truth?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I felt similarly. I thought like, wow, I've been working in this space. I feel like I've heard this narrative about, being pregnant, you're going to glow, you're going to be this earth mama. And I related to zero of those things. I did not particularly enjoy pregnancy at all. There were moments, right? Like there are always these moments where like the baby's kicking and you can feel it and it's magical and oh my God, it's like, but then it gets kind of weird. Like there's a human in my body. Like it's kind of a weird thing. And so I really, I've always been a more creative business person. I started as a designer and writer and creative director. So I think my mind just went there. Like, okay, I don't know why we don't just talk about the fact that like incubating another human in your own body is a kind of weird thing. But I think, it's interesting. Like one of the things that I've bumped up against a lot is people who read my work and they're like, wow, this is very honest. And I say, I know. Isn't it nice? Isn't it nice to have honesty in this conversation? And they're like, but don't you think if you tell women the truth about pregnancy, no one is going to want to get pregnant? And my answer is always, women can handle it. Like we handle everything. We can handle it.
I'm just curious, who is telling you this?
Oh my God, so many people over the years.
Really?
Men,
wow.
Other women. Yeah, because declining birth rates and like people attribute that to, instead of the real problem, which is like there's no family support at all in this country, like before, during, after pregnancy, with small kids, like there's nothing. We don't focus on that problem. Instead, people think, well, if women thought that pregnancy was hard, women just wouldn't have babies. I think that's a bunch of BS.
What's really interesting is, it's funny, I was just listening to you thinking, I wish I knew stuff about fertility before, because I didn't really understand, I'm a doctor, right? But I never paid attention. I understood the process, but I don't think I took a minute to sort of think about what it feels like, what the process looks like. There's so many misconceptions about fertility, but pregnancy itself, at least for me, I had an amazing pregnancy. I felt healthier being pregnant with my 2 kids than I felt the rest of the time I've been alive, which is really interesting. And I think that's also like, it's different for different people, right? Pregnancy is not the same for everybody. People feel differently. I didn't have any nausea. I mean, I have like underlying health conditions, and so I didn't think I could get pregnant or stay pregnant. But once I got pregnant, I had some issues staying pregnant. But once we got past that, it was like, I was glowing. It was amazing. I didn't have any symptoms. I went through it like, oh my God, this is amazing. Is this what it's like? Outside of doing studies on babies, again, I'm a doctor and I'm a specialist. I do procedures. I'd never changed a diaper. I didn't know what it was like to take care of a baby. I didn't know what came afterwards. I had all sorts of postpartum stuff, which was really shocking. So just to kind of like go back, let's start like pre-pregnancy. You've written another book, Fertility Rules. What are some common, I would say, misconceptions that you found out about fertility that you've come across while you've been researching and writing this book that you think we should all know about?
Well, one data point that I think will probably not surprise you even as a doctor that I read and I thought, oh man, I really do have to write this book, because as Chrissy knows, now in the middle of this process, writing books is no joke. It is a very big commitment. But I read this study that showed that over 40% of med school students don't even understand ovulation. Like if even doctors don't understand ovulation, we have a big problem. So, when we're
the
kids,
human body is
right?
complicated.
Yeah, I do want to say that. And there are many also doctors, for example, and they're not trained in truly understanding biology. I come from the biotech world, and I'm always surprised, even when I go and see a physician, regardless of what area it is, they have quite a lack of knowledge of simple biology and science and mechanism of action of drugs that they prescribe. So this is not just an issue in fertility or women's health, but generally, this is why, Leslie, I'm so excited about your book and you educating and giving power to patients, because in any area where we go as patients, we do need to be empowered, because otherwise, even a well-meaning physician and a well-meaning healthcare system You cannot know everything. And I'm surprised often, for example, I speak to some patients that have been pregnant and also have autoimmune disease. I'll be curious, Leslie, you mentioned that you have colitis. Many are surprised to know that, to Ash's point, many of those patients with autoimmune disease actually feel better during pregnancy. But then once they deliver, they get extraordinarily sick. And again, I am not sure if you've done research on that or have spoken to other women, but when they do give birth, they get so sick because all of a sudden their immune system immediately after delivery goes back on full drive. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that, given your background and your healthcare medical history.
I mean, I can give you a really good N of one, which is ice cream is absolutely my favorite substance, and I can't eat it. Like the vegan stuff I can eat, but most of the time it's not good and it's just not worth it, you know? But like the real deal is what I actively fantasize about, and I can't eat it. It just makes me sick. It's like there's an opportunity cost to that decision. Occasionally I'm willing to do it in the middle of the summer with my kids. I had an ice cream window during pregnancy where I could eat ice cream every day. And I did, and I enjoyed it. And then one day that window shut and it was done. And that was that. So it is interesting. You know, I think Ash said this really well earlier, like pregnancy is really different for everybody. You come into pregnancy with underlying conditions. You come into pregnancy with sensitivities. Sometimes your body gets a little rewired. We don't really understand why during pregnancy. Like hormone levels change, but you know, things get suppressed, reactions get suppressed. Your immune system is trying not to like reject a baby. So there are some interesting theories about that. But I think that, you know, returning to the point about medical school students, I just want to say that I completely agree with you. You only have 4 years. Fertile windows are a fundamental of human biology that everyone should know, including men. Men should understand fertile windows. What a world we would live in if men simply understood that there is only a small window every month when a woman can get pregnant. And in that window, no sperm can get through. Like you got to keep them locked up in that window or else you might be welcoming, like half of all pregnancies are unplanned, right around half. So imagine a world, like everyone should know this. Everyone should know this from the time that they can actually make a baby, have a baby. We should be teaching this in sex ed, but we don't because we're really scared. Like we're so focused on all this other stuff. I talk to a lot of parents now actually who ask me how to have these conversations with their children. And I say every time, open, honestly, and often. And focus on biology. You don't have to talk to your 10-year-old about sex yet, but what you do have to explain is like, how does the menstrual cycle work? How does pregnancy work? You don't have to get into all of the mechanics at that age. You don't have to talk about ejaculation, but you should talk about, you know, when you get your period, like there's a period several weeks later when an egg comes out of your ovary and it can be ovulated. I already talked to my kids about this. My kids both know they came from my uterus. They know my C-section scar. Like they're very into it. They love it. You know, TJ calls it my first home. It's very cute. But I think that we're just, you know, we're failing because we're failing to talk about it. So, you know, but like ovulation, oh my God, really? Like it is, do we like humans? Would we like humans to continue to exist and reproduce? If so, we should probably make sure everyone understands ovulation. And if medical school students don't even know, then like, what are we doing?
I 100% agree with that. And it's because of you that I'm using the proper anatomical terms with my kids and no more of the wee-wees and the pee-wees and all these kind of funky terms.
Hey everyone, we'll get right back to the conversation after a word from our sponsors. Is your healthcare org a tangled mess of Christmas lights? Your care teams are drowning in manual work, juggling dozens of point solutions and burning out in Excel hell, while your engineers work through a backlog bigger than a surgeon's ego. Awell is here to untangle the mess. Their CareOps orchestration platform lets ops and clinical teams design, implement, and improve care flows in days, seamlessly integrated with your existing tech stack. The result? Automated processes, fewer soul-sucking tasks, and faster care model improvements. This year alone, Awell has orchestrated over 14 million care activities for leading organizations such as Astrana Health, Commons Clinic, and Better Health. Ready to save your team from Excel hell? Visit awellhealth.com, that's AWELL health.com, and mention this podcast for a free bootcamp. I'll take you from zero to an implementable workflow in 2 days or less. Awell, the AI-powered care ops platform.
So, but I do want to pivot a little bit because you are also a women's health investor and you've been behind some of the most successful companies in this space as an angel investor, not necessarily attached to a fund. So this was decisions that you made. You wrote the memo, you got conviction, and you said, okay, I'm going to get into companies like Origin and Legacy, which is in the sperm preservation area. You were in Maven very early, which I think is now considered to be one of the most successful companies in the space. So I'd love to hear from you, Leslie, about just business models for women's health, because these are between the four of us, we all spend time here, we're all passionate. But how do we move from just this space of passion and seeing the need and recognizing how untapped it is to a space where we can actually build companies that can IPO, that can be public companies, that can raise rounds of capital? How do we do that?
Listen, I mean, Kate and Maven deserve a ton of credit for this. I think they've really blazed the way for so many people. And I remember you asked like what it's like to invest in this space and the personal passion. Like I met Kate when she was still an investor at Index. And the quality that I recognized in her, like she had a bunch of ideas that were not Maven. And she went through like her process and eventually came to the idea through, it originated with doula care actually. But the quality that she had was Kate is unstoppable. Kate is somebody who can hear no and just plow on through and keep going, even when it gets really hard. She's incredibly resilient. You know, I think anyone that's worked with her knows that she's just relentless in like the best possible way. Yeah, she's relentless. It's amazing. But I think, you know, what Kate did really well, just to model kind of the way I think about this space now, is back at that time, no one was really doing much in women's health. Like there was a lot of interest in this space. Even when Rock Health first got started, we wanted to invest in women's health companies, but it was very difficult to see how there would be a model for them to be successful because not enough investors were really interested. We had these meetings with male investors and they'd say things like, oh, I don't know if my wife experienced incontinence after pregnancy. I guess I'll have to go home and ask her. Or, oh, I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but let me go ask my girlfriend. Maybe she'll know the answer to that. Rather than evaluating it on its business merits, they had to evaluate it on its would my wife or girlfriend go use this service? Sometimes I think male investors still can't see past the actual problem to the opportunity and the TAM. Even now, I think that Origin's a great example of this. They're crushing it. Origin is great. Corrine is amazing. Same quality as Kate, where she just sat in these meetings with male investors oftentimes who were like, oh, wow, wait, what's a pelvic floor? Is that a Kegel thing? Oh, interesting. But my wife didn't have that. So I don't really think this is real. And it's dude, your wife is not going to tell you she peed her pants when she sneezed.
I mean, that's so interesting. Leslie, do you think to Chrissy's question, are women's health companies mainly focused around reproductive organs of women? And are they building in one verticalized thing at a time, like pelvic floor therapy, fertility? Or is the next set of women's health companies that come out a platform play or an end-to-end? How do you get these to be IPO-able companies? I mean, Progeny is a great example, right? They seem to have conquered some of the space and figured out how to be really, really successful. So how do we get more of these things out there to become successful?
Yeah, can also, because it's a really good point. Leslie, tell us what you think. I'd like to also opine on that because I may have a different perspective.
Yeah, listen, there are lots of point solutions that have come up. I think it's made it difficult for people to take the space seriously. Use Origin as example. Pelvic floor might seem like it's a point solution. It's actually not. It's a problem that persists from the time a woman is young. Young women can have pelvic floor problems from the time that they are, if they're athletes, a lot of runners have it, even as 18-year-old girls. Men can also have pelvic floor issues, by the way. Weightlifters famously do. When you put on too much weight, when you're too sedentary, it is actually a problem of both sexes. But I think that, yes, every company should start with focus and a wedge and their beachhead and all of the words that we hear tossed about a lot. But you also have to now be able to answer the question, now that Maven is in the world, if it is a platform play, why can't Maven just do that? Well, if I'm going to buy as an employer or a payer, if Maven can do it, then why don't I just like pay them to do it? You know, even if maybe your idea or your execution is slightly better, it's easier for me because I already have an account with Maven, and Maven has proven like it does, the company does great work. So I think it's an easy one to point to because that's also kind of how Maven started. Maven started with telemedicine, and then, you know, companies were like, can you help with milk shipping? Done. Can you help with fertility payments? Done. Like they just expanded to fill the need from all of these, you know, employers that were using it as a benefit platform. But then also look at MIDI. Look how much money MIDI has raised since September. What's the last count? It's like 65 million just to focus on menopause, which is an interesting thing. Again, like this might seem like it's a point solution, but when you look at the market, when you look at gynecology, when you look at ACOG does not even have a menopause specialty for people to get. There's like a certificate you can get, but it's not, there's no obstetrics or reproductive endocrinology. Like menopause is not in that category. So I think that some of the things that might look like point solutions aren't actually, because they fill such a huge need. It is such a big market. Unlike pregnancy, every woman who goes through her 50s will go through menopause. Not every woman will choose to get pregnant. Menopause will affect 50% of the population that achieves that age. So
just to add on to that menopause point, it's not all about just like hormonal stuff, right? There's actually secondary implications. And not that menopause causes cardiovascular disease, but how you deal with it actually impacts your cardiac risk, stroke risk, like once you hit like menopausal age, right? So maybe to your point, you sort of get in with like what is the most important, and then you expand around because the population around that age that's like experiencing menopause actually has a really high risk of like cardiovascular risk and stroke risk and all these other things that can become part of that solution. So that's really interesting.
So I do want to say, osteoporosis, absolutely. And we can have a whole discussion on osteoporosis drugs and why there isn't as much interest in not just research, but development of those drugs either. I do think, and I would love everybody's opinion on this, I do think that we are doing a bit of a disservice to women's health by only focusing on to Ash's point, on reproductive organs. And I would say 2 periods of women's lives. And by the way, as you all have mentioned, not all, I have kids, we all have kids here on this podcast, which is wonderful, but there are many women that either cannot or choose not to. And I think we're doing a bit of disservice by only focusing on that. If I just throw out a few numbers, first of all, I think we all know the statistics that women are about 80% user of the healthcare system. And it's not so much because, and these stats, I remember when I was back at Google, we looked very carefully about who is utilizing the healthcare system. And it's not because, yes, it's pregnancy and menopause, but it's not because of that. It's mostly because when people get sick, men often don't go to the doctor. The usual saying from many doctors is men are born, their mothers take them to pediatrician, then they get a heart attack and then they die. So as a result, they really do not go to the doctor, and they should. So so that's number one, is women are utilizers of the healthcare system. Number two, women also bring men, because they're often caretakers or they're good friends, and they bring either their friends who are men or they bring their family members to the doctor. So again, they're utilizers of the healthcare system. So the reason why one should be paying attention to women's health, and women's health, again, not just reproductive system, but getting even marketing drugs. So if we're talking about marketing drugs for men, I would encourage marketing drugs for men through the eyes of a woman, because it's going to be a woman that's going to say, hey, husband or friend or dad or son, let's go and get you that medication. So that's one of the things that we may want to think about. Number two is, if you look at number one killers, well, number two killer is heart disease, as Ash said, in the world. And number two is cancer. And what's the number one cancer of the killer of all cancers is breast cancer.
Actually, the number one killer of women is cardiovascular disease. Mm-hmm. And I think, I could be wrong on this, I haven't checked the numbers recently, but Leslie, you tell me, but I think it's more than, that risk is higher than all of the cancers combined for women, for risk of death for women. It's really interesting.
That is what I understand to be true.
It's probably also because we don't know how to diagnose women. Women, and Ashley, you know this better than anyone. You're the physician. I don't think women come in and they can't breathe, or they're holding their hand to the chest. I think that they have entirely different symptoms. and they're often discharged. They come in and hey, I feel nausea, I feel this and that, I feel tired. And they say, hey, you're just tired, go away. They're discharged, and then they die of heart disease. So I think that there is a lot there and I hope that, and we can start investing and really building companies around women's health. And lastly, and this is something really close to what I do in the life sciences, is clinical trials. So in clinical trials, if we think about dosing, when we're doing dose projections for, let's say, small molecules, even on mice, we don't like to do those on female mice. We prioritize male mice. They don't have all the other pesky issues with female mice. So we do the dose projections on male mice, dose projection on larger animals, dose projection on non-human primates. Then we get into actual humans. And again, we structure our dosing for men, even for drugs that are, predominantly like heart disease and other Lipitor-like drugs that are supposed to be for women. So we're taking horse pills. I can tell you, for me, I take usually whatever is prescribed. I take half of it. I don't know what you guys do, but I'm very careful about the doses that are prescribed for women. And by the way, we also metabolize drugs very differently, regardless even of size. Anyway, I'll pause here. Would love everybody's thoughts.
You say a lot of good things about men and the fact that like men's health ends up being a women's health problem, both from a treatment surrogates for, fertility treatments and the rest of it. It's on that vein, actually, Legacy. If you talk to Colette at Legacy, which I do frequently, he will tell you interesting snippets like over half of buyers of the Legacy sperm testing kits are women. Women are the ones who are buying the kits. And, after writing 2 books, which I wrote very much for both, I did not just write these books for women. Like, my perspective is men have to be welcomed with open arms into this conversation, or else nothing is going to change throughout all of these years. If a man feels more responsibility for his sperm, he's probably going to be more involved in the pregnancy and then be a more involved father as well. This is my thesis. But if you look around, and this is like, people ask me all the time, like, why didn't you just build an app? Or why did you write a book? Like, why write a book? Okay, first of all, pregnancy books sell. There are a lot of pregnancy books sold. What to Expect is consistently in the top 100 of all books sold on Amazon. It's bananas. And it's not a good book, but it's crazy how many copies that book has sold. But really, none of these books, there are like some dude, you're a dad books and like things that are written in this way that are like very kind of, to me, they're kind of insulting to men. Like, not everyone wants to be called a dude. And like, why are we talking to men that way? It's just like, you go mama, like not everyone wants to be a you go mama. Like, why are we not just treating people like adults? But none of these pregnancy books are really written for men. So that was like my secret plan, right? I looked around and I talked to a lot of men, including my husband, and I was like, what do you want to know about this? Like, what would make your life better? What would help you be more supportive of me? I'm having a hard time, but you don't seem to know what to do about it. So like, can I just tell you what I need? And then he was like, yeah, just tell me. So that's my like whole thing. I'm like, here's a 2x4, just tell them what you need. But until some of this content is, we can build all the apps we want, but like books are still a big part of pregnancy. And I think we've got to look at these other areas of life, like sex ed, all the rest of it, if we really want that kind of, gendered dynamic to change for women. But I absolutely, like, the dosing stuff drives me crazy too. I actually usually take it as prescribed personally. I have not been prescribed antibiotics in a long time, even though I have 2 children under, 5 and under. But, we don't understand women's symptoms. Like, heart attacks present very differently in men and women. And sometimes women who show up to the emergency room with a heart attack are sent home because, even the guidelines, my understand, Ash, is that you confirm for me, but I've heard from several people that actually, like the way it's taught in medical school, the symptoms that they teach you to look for are actually the ones that present in men. Is that right?
So I haven't been in medical school in a really long time, just as a caveat. So I'm hoping things have changed. But yes, I mean, when I went to medical school, I think it was still being taught as, clutching your chest, pain in your left shoulder, whatever. But the symptoms for women are indeed different, right? They present differently. And I'm hoping that it is being taught differently. But I think more importantly, one interesting thing I saw on cardiovascular risk for women is I think the understanding of symptoms of cardiac disease and risk of cardiac disease has actually decreased in women compared to like the generations before us. I don't remember the exact stat. Like, kudos to the American Heart Association for doing, Go Red for Women and all these sort of campaigns to bring awareness. I think it's like beyond medical school, right, Leslie, to your point? It's like, it takes a community to educate people. There are more than 50% of us. And so kudos to all these organizations. But I read something like their research recently showed that there's been an 81% decline in understanding of cardiovascular disease and risk in like 18 to 30-year-olds. So 65 and over, people actually understand what to look for because they've been paying attention to their risk, but younger women don't. And heart disease and stroke is not just an old person's disease. We're all at risk and we should understand it. So to your point, I think it's more than just medical students, and I am hoping they're teaching it differently. But
actually, can I ask a quick question about stroke? I mean, one thing that I have a hard time understanding and nobody's been able to explain to me, because I've been asking many medical professionals and experts and I get different answers, which is the majority of women are prescribed birth control pills for many different reasons. And it contains estrogen. And estrogen could be an issue for women that could have a stroke or a stroke in the family and higher risk for stroke. I don't know if Chrissy or Ash or Leslie, you guys have heard of even birth control pill and issues with taking estrogen containing birth control pill with other drugs and drug to drug interaction and potential for risks for high risk patients that have other comorbidities potentially.
All I know on this topic, and I'll caveat and say Ash is the only physician in the group. It just feels like nobody really when you go through this whole birth control conversation, like nobody really talks to you about, you're just told like, okay, take the pill. I didn't even feel like I was presented with a full suite of options, let alone having somebody discuss with me what my risks are. And maybe that goes back to your point, Luba, that I don't think we really addressed, which is this problem of the lack of inclusion of women in clinical research and how that has trickled down through our system to, we just have some fundamental education gaps. Whenever I text with Leslie, I'm like, how do we not know that? Like, how do we not know these simple things? Like, why are women having miscarriages? Why are women having higher risks of certain conditions? What are the true risks associated with taking certain kinds of birth control? And she's like, oh, well, nobody studied it. And it just seems to come up over and over again. And I don't know that we answered your question on that, Luba. And maybe I'll also throw in another problem, which seems to be the lack of funding going towards this research at the same time. So I wonder if anybody in this group has heard of any bright spots here of like when we might actually know things about women.
I mean, the Biden administration did just make a big announcement, the ARPA-H initiative. They were taking proposals. The grant process was supposed to be very simple for once. And there was a big theoretical chunk of money that they're throwing at it. Now, who knows what happens if there's an administration change? Like, I think that actually is probably one of the big reasons that this kind of funding is so difficult to get, at least from the NIH, which is the biggest funder of medical research in the world, actually, is that when there's an administration change and a budget change, then all of that money goes away. Like, even if some of it is bookmarked, they can redirect it. So, I was down in DC on Tuesday, and there's like a lot of conjecture about the election and like where all of this stuff is going. It was a maternal health event with Congress. And I think a lot of people deeply care. I think a lot of people want to see this change, a lot of women especially. But I still think like we need men to care too. But men don't even care about it. To Luba's earlier point, like men don't care about their own bodies. Men will legitimately do anything to avoid going to the doctor. Like they just don't want to interact with their healthcare system. Many men are brought up to believe that talking about your health or complaining about your health or dealing with your health is, a sign of weakness, which we all know that it's not.
Leslie, is that still the case, or are we living in like a Silicon Valley, like sort of, or nutrition bubble over here? Because every other thread on X, when I open it, is somebody who's talking about like nutrition, and if you do this, your testosterone goes up, and here's all the things you should eat, like red meat. It seems to be very focused on like male nutrition and body and change, and I haven't seen a lot of like ads actually ever from anybody who's like doing this for women, at least on my thread. But maybe X thinks I'm a man, so I don't know.
God,
but
those two, it's like these older men who seem to have no body fat, and like all the men in Valley.
So I see a lot of that. So I'm like, maybe is it changing? Like, are men becoming more aware, Leslie?
I love it. I don't know what you guys are, by the way. I have no idea what you guys are searching on X, because I can assure you, I do not have any of these things pop up.
Yeah,
send it to you.
Send it to me so I can click.
The Andrew Huberman, Mark Hyman effect is for sure real in a certain population, but I would venture to say that if you've been in an airport in, say, Denver, and you look around at the average health profile of people flying through the air, it's a very busy airport with people from all over the country connecting and doing all kinds of things. Like, I think it's a niche, like, Silicon Valley thing. And I've been on the quantified self-train for a very long time, like since 6, like I've been tracking that stuff. And that was actually the first book I was supposed to write, was about, I quantified selfed my ulcerative colitis, and I've been medication free for a very long time because I'm just very controlling about my diet. It took a year of food tracking.
I want to read it.
I'll write the book for you in one sentence. Keep a food diary. Like, be super meticulous, keep a food diary, and then cut out those things and just be absolutely zero tolerance. Like ice cream. Like, I can't eat ice cream. And as long as I don't eat ice cream, red meat, fried foods, like all the things that you kind of should be fairly minimal about anyway. I don't eat much meat. I eat a lot of eggs. I don't eat ice cream. But I do think, there are 2 things that factor into this, right? One is, like, people can consume this content all they want, but it is actually very restrictive. And for the majority of people, that kind of restriction is not an achievable goal. It's something that's come up a lot in my research. I actually for some people, the perspective I take is controversial, even though every single nutritionist and physician that I speak to is, like, pretty grateful that I do, which is that I think 80-20 is the goal everyone should have. Because if we could just eat moderately, like 80% of the time you eat whole unprocessed foods, and the other 20% of the time you eat what you want, but just don't binge. Keeping it that simple for people would make a huge impact. But I think on the one side, you've got the Silicon Valley set who's, like, following Brian Johnson and Huberman and the rest of them, who are saying all kinds of things, some of which is grounded in actual science, and some of it's not. Some of it's pretty crazy.
So
the Leslie, supplementation, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, so I love where you're going with this, and I actually did quite a bit of research when everybody started going in and doing, what are these diets called, where you don't eat for 12 hours or 16
fasting.
hours or something.
Intermittent fasting.
Yeah, intermittent. So people started going crazy, and I thought, I let me do some research, because going back to metabolism of drugs, we also metabolize food as women differently, and we store fat very differently. We respond to fasting differently because of the fact that we give birth. So what's interesting, I thought, I wonder what I can find in actual literature and actual clinical studies. And guess what I found is that there are not that many clinical studies, but the studies that there are out there, they show that intermittent fasting is actually terrible for women. They work short term, but that's it. And mostly because you lose a lot of water, you lose a lot of nutrients and other things, but it's terrible. It's terrible for your body. It's sending signal for you to actually store fat. So you might not think that you have fat. You're actually storing fat around your organs, and you're growing fat around your organs when you're doing that, again, to protect a baby if you were to become pregnant. So it's horrible. I'm shocked that, again, when we talk about women's health, even something like intermittent fasting and all of these fads, they're designed specifically for men. So Leslie, I encourage you to maybe have a book about, maybe there is a fasting, but certainly it's not for 12 hours. Because I can tell you, according to pretty much any real clinical research, you'll see it sends horrible signals to women's bodies, and it actually makes you store fat, and is also terrible for your skin. So
Luba, there are a lot of people on Twitter that would come after you with pitchforks for saying that. Obsession with intermittent fasting is so real.
But it's just for women. People have to check what it is for women. It's women respond very differently than men.
And keto is the same way. I'm not convinced that is good for women. I'm gonna do a rapid fire round because we're down to our last few minutes. So I'm gonna push on Leslie on this, and then also my 2 co-hosts, Luba and Ash. Okay, so my first question for all of you is, what do you think is going to be the next women's health company to IPO? Luba, you're first.
I think it's going to be in menopause.
Which one? You got to name names.
It's not out there yet. It's going to have to be built, and it has to be around true science, and not menopause management, but true scientifically, clinically evidence-based company. That Leslie is going to start next.
Ooh, maybe. I do want to write a book about menopause, but I'm going to just say the obvious one, which is Maven's going to be the first IPO in women's health and digital health. Of course, like Maven deserves every bit of it. But there hasn't been one yet. Like there hasn't even, what do you mean next? We need the first one. And first. Maven's going to be the first one. That's I'm calling it now.
I think progeny counts.
Progeny counts.
Fertility.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I can.
Progeny counts.
It kind of counts.
It's a great company.
All right. What's yours?
I don't have one. I'm sorry. I don't like none of the companies that are out there right now. There's so much going on. I don't think anybody's ready to IPO. The market's not ready. And I think the way we define women's health is really confined to like reproductive organs. So unless I see expansion beyond women's health, I just don't see a company out there right now. Maven's probably the closest. I wish them a lot of luck, but I think we got to have much more robust companies out there coming out.
I'd love to see a life sciences company that was really focused on women do well. And I mean, I love Gamito. I think Dina Radenkovic is she's another one who's relentless. I really hope
that could be really interesting. I could see that growing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could buy that. I don't think I have one right now either. It's probably down to Maven or Midi for me, one of the two M's. Okay, next rapid fire is if you had to write your next book on some topic related to women's health, what would be the topic? And I will pick on Ash for this one, even though I don't think you're going to write a book.
No, I like writing, but it has to be nice and short. So I would focus on the connection between the gut and the brain. And I don't know if it works differently for men and women. I have an assumption that it does. I think there are a lot of things like autonomic dysfunction that has a lot of secondary effects on GI. And I think it just gets chucked as like IBS. So I'd want to do more research on this and understand what's going on. I've been speaking with a lot of interesting women out there, like Fiji, who's a CEO of Instacart, who's doing some interesting work on this. So if I was going to write a book, that's where I would focus.
Very obvious for me in my head, it would be on longevity. I have a few secrets up my sleeve that I could disclose potentially in a book. It's been specifically for women, going back to the kind of metabolism and just the differentiated.
This is a safe space. You can do it next time on here. We won't tell anybody.
And Leslie, I think you already told us yours. It's the menopause book, right?
Yeah, but I'll tell you it has a twist. It's actually a preventive longevity focused book that starts in your early 40s. I write from what I know, so I'm kind of like living it right now, and then I will write it in a few years. But I think that there is so much that you can do when you're in your early 40s to make your life more pleasant later. Like decisions you can make about lifestyle, food, even, estrogen, like continuing to take it throughout instead of like chopping it off and then restarting it. So I'm in the very noodling phases of that, but like, the project has a name. It's like in my head, it's just going to be a little bit. I got to live some more of it. I've got to get further into my 40s before I write that book.
I'm way into my 40s, and I have to say I've been living it. So happy to give you some tips.
Love it. I'll take them.
Well, I can't even think about the book because I'm currently writing one. So if I start thinking about the next one, I'm going to keel over and have a heart attack, and then we're going to have another heart attack victim on our hands.
We don't want a statistic.
No.
Don't be part of the statistics. So with that,
wait, Chrissy, what's your book? What are you writing about now? Tell us.
Okay. Yes, it is a book about storytelling and how important it is as a skill set in the world of business today, with lots of interesting case studies. So hopefully that book will be out in 2025, but I'm in the throes of the final edits, and it's brutal, as Leslie knows. It's not easy. Well,
can I just say one thing? I think, Leslie, you're so incredible and amazing. You're known to be this author and investor all around women's health, but I was doing research into you, and you've got a whole nother life. We've got to have you come back and talk about your past life. You're a co-founder of a food company. You were a creative designer. I mean, crickets, I don't want to talk about it on this episode, but I have to just call out and say you're interesting.
The crickets were really good. I was very sad about that one eventually.
Well, here's the episode I want you guys to do. Maybe not with me, but maybe someone else, is freaking food. This is the big unsolved problem, which is America's obsession with terrible food is actually causing all of these, like no digital health company can solve the problems that are happening in the food industry. And we need to get serious about that. But I'll come back on here and hang out anytime.
We'd love to have
Awesome.
you. This was awesome.
Leslie, it's been so fun having you here. I just want to say this has been an excellent discussion. We definitely want to have you back. Just as a reminder to everybody, Leslie is not just an author and an investor. She's got so many other things that she's done in her past. I'd love to hear about her diverse backgrounds, maybe on the next pod. But your unique career and the twists and turns it's taken and led us to women's health. You are an expert on women's health. I follow you and see what you write. I follow your blog. Where should people go to learn about you, Leslie?
I mean, I'm all over the internet, but yeah, my Substack's a good spot, and I'm on Instagram and I'm on X, Twitter, whatever it's called this week. And sometimes I put things on LinkedIn now too, which is very fun. But yes, I do have a very random past, and thank God it's brought me to this work, because I am very, very fortunate to do what I do, write about the things that I do, and have discussions like this, which was so much fun. I'll come back anytime. Invite me back, please.
Awesome. Well, Leslie, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your passion for women's health. Take a proactive and holistic approach to your health. Women, you makes a world of difference. Men, please get involved. It's as much men's health as it is women's health. That's what we've learned today. And stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll dive into more topics with experts like Leslie.
Leslie's one of my dearest friends, so I'm definitely a little bit ethically biased here. I'm just going to put it out there. But honestly, I mean, she is one of the best thinkers out there in women's health. She's written, 2 books on the subject. She's probably going to write a third. I think everything that she's saying is spot on. And what really stands out to me whenever I speak with her is really the focus on men's health and men's fertility, which honestly, I don't see or hear about nearly enough. Why is fertility even considered a women's health issue, for instance, when half the time it comes down to the man? And I think it gives men this opportunity to kind of, just say this is my wife's problem and not stand up and get the testing that they need. I mean, Leslie was even just telling me a story yesterday of a friend of ours where, they couldn't get pregnant for months, and it turned out that the guy was going on extremely long bike rides and then taking hot tubs. So, how did that all land with the two of you? Because I particularly like that focus that she has.
I mean, that's great. I love the conversation. I do think it's important. Women's health is broader than just fertility and reproductive medicine, but I'm glad we sort of focused in that space. And I think the focus on men's health is incredibly important. The one part of the conversation I'd love to have her or somebody else in the space come back when it comes to this particular space is environmental factors. I think there are endocrine disrupting chemicals that we could talk about on fertility. And I know Leslie loves to chat about it, and we didn't get to it. But things like BPA, phthalates, pesticides, right? They interfere with hormone function, and I'm sure that's also leading to reproductive issues. So I'd love to kind of learn more about what should we be thinking about. Is this in the creams we put on our face? Like, we should have this discussion to see if this is real impact or not. So I'd love to hear more from her when she comes back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. She's definitely one of those guests that I would love to have back, and not just her knowledge, but her passion also. She's also, I know when after the podcast, we also all caught up, and she talked about her perspective on other researchers in this space and other books that are written on fertility. She had more of a holistic point of view and made a lot of sense of, here's a perspective of some writers, some books. I know we touched a bit on what to expect when expecting, but she has really a breadth of knowledge of what's out there and the guides that are used to help women. And actually, some of them perhaps don't help women. So I would love to have her back. Maybe we have a whole fertility special and have her back just to provide us some of that perspective so she can empower us and more women.
And men.
Thanks for tuning in to Second Opinion. Share it with colleagues and friends and message us to let us know what topics you want to discuss on the podcast. If you want to support the show, the best ways are to leave a review wherever you're listening and make sure you are subscribed. And check out Christina's Second Opinion newsletter on Beehive. A link to subscribe is in the episode description. Second Opinion is part of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Turpentine VC, Age of Miracles, and more shows for experts by experts in tech.